What's up, everybody? It's your boy Mastamynd here over for Ohio Cannabis Live, and welcome back to another episode of 420 Live Ohio. If you're new to the channel, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button right now, and make sure you hit the notification bell for updates. We do appreciate you being here, and we'll start the show in just a second.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mastermind!
I'm sure Dr. Soin will be joining us in a few. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, committee members. Today's August 12th, 2021, and the meeting of the Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee will now come to order. So today's meetings are coming to order with the following members present. I do have Ms. Seidel.
Present.
Yes. Let's see, Mr. Coder is not here. Mr. Casement.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Present.
Sheriff Treglia is not with us today. Ms. Mosca.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Stanek.
Present.
Thank you. And Mr. Kowalski.
Present.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Committee members, we have been, you were sent the meeting minutes from the June 17th, 2021 Advisory Committee meeting. I do believe there is a correction that Mr. Casement was present at the meeting. It is marked as absent, so we'd like to update those meeting minutes. Are there any other changes or corrections to the meeting minutes from last meeting? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion to accept the meeting minutes with that change?
I so move to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel, and I hear a second from Mr. Casement.
Second.
Thank you very much. And for approval, Mr. Kowalski.
Approved.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Stanek.
Yes.
And Ms. Lawrence.
Approved.
Ms. Mosca.
Yes.
And Mr. Casement.
Approved.
All right, we will update those meeting minutes and submit those. All right, perfect. So I would like to just remind everyone in the audience and the committee of our ground rules that we have here. So although this is a public meeting, the committee will not be accepting any testimony or public comments during this meeting. We ask that everyone to stay up to date on any program announcements. I want everyone to please sign up for the email updates with our medical marijuana control program at our homepage at www.medicalmarijuana.ohio.gov. All right, we will be moving into our committee report. So with us today are our representatives from the 3 state agencies responsible for the medical marijuana control program. I'm going to turn things over to our program team, to Ms. Martin Moore. And I do ask committee members to hold off questions until she is completed, unless you want to acknowledge any questions during the presentation, and just to have an opportunity to discuss and answer any questions.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone in person, and it's a pleasure to see an audience and not just be online like we have been. It's definitely a different meeting than what I've experienced the last few. So I'm going to start off, as always, and talk about a little bit about the patient and caregiver registry and where we are. We are almost at 300,000 recommendations that have been made. And just as a reminder, patients can have more than one recommendation, which is why the number of recommendations is higher than the number of registered patients. So, for example, a patient could have renewed or their recommendation expired, and we may have a single patient that may have 3 or 4 recommendations. Our total number of registered patients is right around 202,247, and these numbers are through the end of June. We have been working with our vendor to hone in a little bit on the patient numbers that we are receiving. So we've eliminated some of the classes of patients from that count, namely the caregivers were somewhat being included, so we've honed that. We've also started tracking the number of patients with an active recommendation and an active registration. So in other words, those are the number of patients that could walk into a dispensary today and make a purchase. And that's at right around 107,134. I will note that there was a legislative extension in place through July 1st. So patients were able to use a facially expired registration card and still go into a dispensary and purchase. So we know a lot of patients took advantage of that. and we're required to renew by July 1st, but even if they renew after that date, they are still eligible to continue being patients in the program. So we do expect a large number of patients who will renew in July and probably even going into August and maybe September that we're taking advantage of that legislative extension. And then we also have the numbers for veterans, indigent, those with a terminal diagnosis, and then the unique patient number. That is the number of patients who have actually gone into a dispensary and made a purchase. So of those registered patients, that's how many chose to take advantage of that card and to actually go in and purchase. And then we have 22,782 caregivers. These numbers tend not to change too much from month to month, so I won't spend a lot of time on them, but we do keep track of the number of patients that we have by age and by condition. These, again, the numbers change, but the order generally doesn't change too much. Occasionally some things will flip-flop, but generally pain and post-traumatic stress disorder are the most common reasons that patients are recommended medical marijuana. And I also point out we have added, the medical board added 3 new conditions, I believe at their June meeting. And so those were added during the month of June. So this is really only a few weeks of that being in the system where physicians could recommend marijuana based on those conditions. So we have started reporting the numbers for the 3 new conditions. Dispensary update, this has already changed. As of this morning, we issued another certificate of operation to Harvest here in Columbus. So we are now at 55 dispensaries with certificates of operation, and we have 3 remaining provisional licenses outstanding. So that means there's 3 additional dispensaries that are still working towards getting open. We also track our dispensary staff numbers. We're at just under 1,500, and this number was as of the end of July. So the next thing I want to talk about is COVID measures. We just had our board meeting earlier this week for the pharmacy board, and this was one of the issues that was discussed at the meeting. So the board voted to end the temporary expansion of caregiver registration. So what we had allowed during COVID was for patients to register their caregivers directly with the pharmacy board, so they did not have to do that through their physician. And it also increased the number of caregivers that a patient could have and the number of patients that a caregiver could have from 2 to 3. And that was a COVID measure we put in place. We found that most patients were still using their doctors to register, and COVID wasn't much of a hindrance for physicians doing that registration. And in fact, there was a benefit from the physician being involved in that caregiver determination. We also have not seen a lot of caregivers taking advantage of the additional, or a lot of patients taking advantage of the additional caregivers. And we also do allow for that in our rule. So there is still that ability for patients to have additional caregivers or caregivers to have additional patients that's built into the rule. So we felt like that extension or that expansion was no longer necessary. We also had a photo ID requirement COVID measure in place, and that was mainly put in place when the BMVs were closed, and it allowed patients with an expired driver's license to go in and use that driver's license. It also allowed patients who had maybe lost their ID or had some other identification issue that they were unable to remedy because of the COVID measure, because of COVID closings and things like that, to use other forms of ID. And since the BMVs have opened and driver's licenses needed to be renewed as of July 1st, we decided that photo ID expansion leniency was no longer necessary. Since that time, the board has also passed some resolution guidance that allows alternative forms of ID to be used just outside as a general practice, regardless of the COVID issue. So patients can register with a birth certificate, with other approved forms of identification, even without the COVID measure being in place. Phone and online ordering, those measures are still currently in place. We are going back and looking at potentially putting those permanently into the rules, what we want that to look like in the rules, what parameters we want to keep in place for those. Curbside delivery is also still in place. We have had an ask from the industry going forward, particularly in light of having the next RFA coming soon, to expand curbside and to allow drive-thrus. We've had conversations with our compliance team. They are supportive of that. It is something, we do see in traditional pharmacy that patients can drive through at CVS, at Walgreens, at Kroger to make their purchases. So the board had some discussion on that, and we anticipate going back probably next month with maybe a rule change and a resolution that would also allow dispensaries to have similar drive-through as long as all of the security measures are in place. This is probably our hot topic here, the RFA. If the committee members recall, at the last meeting, I believe I had indicated back in April, the board approved the issuance of 73 new dispensary licenses. We were still working at getting our rules governing that RFA process through the proper channels, getting them all put into place. We ran into a little bit of a bump in the road. So back in July, we took a revised version of the rules back to the board. The board voted and approved those. Those were filed with JCAR. We were supposed to have our JCAR hearing on Monday. That was canceled, so our understanding is that the rules are proceeding. So we are moving forward at this point with the RFA. So I'm just going to go through some of these rule changes with you and explain what the board approved at the July meeting. So there were a couple, just a few rules that pertain to the RFA. So 6201 governs the request for applications to operate medical marijuana dispensaries. And this rule is not maybe as detailed as the other two, but it states that the request for applications will include the procedure used to award the provisional dispensary licenses in the RFA itself. We also changed the timeline just a little bit in the rule. It doesn't affect applicants much. We've made a move throughout our rules to go from days or business days to calendar days. So in accordance with that, it used to give applicants 10 days to actually file their applications, and we expanded that to 14 calendar days, which I think in most situations 10 business days will equal 14 calendar days, so that's not too much of a change. 6202 governs what needs to be included in the application for a medical marijuana dispensary. So we went back and we looked at what were the important things that we really needed to understand when looking at an applicant for a dispensary license. And we tried to clarify these to be much more specific, much more detailed, and requiring some more information in some of these areas. So I put some of these examples into the slides. So one is the financial statements that must be provided. So we want to make sure that anyone who is awarded a provisional dispensary license will have the funds to actually get that dispensary up and running within the required time frame that's set forth in rule. So as part of the application process, an applicant would need to provide financial statements demonstrating that they have enough liquid assets to cover both the costs of construction and renovation and the cost to staff, equip, and operate the dispensary. And under that section, there'd be 2 time periods we would look at, both from the award of the PDL until they actually obtain their certificate of operation, and also from when that certificate of operation is issued for the first 4 months, with an idea that hopefully by then they would be up and operational and making money. They also, this was already in the previous rule, but they cannot have less than $250,000 for each dispensary, or they would have to have the amount of money that they tell us that they are budgeted to open and run that dispensary, so whichever is higher. And then they would also need to let us know what those funding sources will be. So this is a little bit of an addition. And anything that is not listed in the application that they wanted to use, they would need to come back to the board and notify the board and get approval to use those additional resources. So for example, if someone ran into a funding shortage, it was going to cost them more than they thought it was, they can certainly go out and get that extra money. We just want to be made aware and kept in the loop as to where that money is coming from. This is not new, but all the applications are site-specific, meaning that when an applicant comes in, they need to know their exact location. They need to comply with all the zoning rules, with all the 500-foot restrictions that are in place statutorily and within the rules. So we are asking that they provide us with very site-specific plans showing us what that proposed dispensary will look like, and that needs to be based on the specific site that they are using. So they can't just be a general floor plan that they would submit for multiple applications. They need to show us that that floor plan will work for that specific location in the application. It needs to be drawn to scale. It needs to show us the square footage. It also needs to include certain required elements. Obviously, there are other optional elements that they can include in that drawing, but they have to have a dispensary department. They have to show us the restricted access areas, the waiting room, the patient care or consultation area, that they either have an enclosed delivery bay or some other equally secure delivery area where they can accept deliveries of medical marijuana. They need to show us that they have a day storage area with a pass-through window built in, a quote-unquote man trap, or as I like to call it, a person trap, at any ingress or egress area from the dispensary, DEA compliant vault, and they need to show us where their parking will be. So, we recognize there are dispensaries that are in urban areas that may not have a designated parking area, but if they can show us there's a public lot, a block down the road, or where their patients would be able to park, that needs to be part of that application process. And as part of that, they must also provide a construction or renovation budget and a timeline. So that again goes to us wanting to make sure that they have a reasonable schedule that they can follow, that they can get open and up and running within the time frame set forth in the rule. Dispensary application evaluation. I think at the last meeting I mentioned that we were looking at doing a drawing process, so this would be a change from what the board did the last time. So under the changes to the rules that the board approved, we would still have a very robust application process, as I indicated in the last slide. So from that end of things, it would look very similar for applicants. They would still submit it into the portal. We would still get those. We would still review those. We would look at whether those applications comply with all the requirements of the revised code, whether they comply with everything that was put into the RFA, and whether there are any license limitations already in place on that applicant. Applicants can submit unlimited applicants, except they are site-specific, and they can only submit one application per site. And when we're looking at a site, that would also include anything adjoining that parcel. So what we're trying to avoid is, allowing an applicant who has deep pockets from, submitting 20 applications for a single location. This would require they can still submit those 20 applications, but they would need to have 20 separate locations in order to submit those. No owner may have more than 5 provisional dispensary licenses and or certificates of operation. So that is consistent with what is in place now. We do have a 5 license limit per owner. That would stay in place. No owner may be issued more than 66% of the total provisional dispensary licenses and or certificates of operation in a multi-license district. I believe that was something that was included in the previous RFA. We have also incorporated that into the rule as well. And applicants can only be awarded the total number of provisional dispensary licenses for which they have adequate liquid assets. So that goes into that asset question that I referred to previously. So if you tell us I have enough money to open and operate 3 dispensaries And you could still submit 10 applications and hope that you get those 3 dispensaries, but if you happen to get 5 dispensaries, you're only going to be awarded those 3 PDLs that you've indicated you can move forward with. So the district limitations are still in place. We have 31 districts throughout the state. We are keeping those district lines. When the board approved the issuance of the 73 new licenses, there was at least 1 license to be issued in every district except for 1. If we receive the same number or less applications for a district than there are licenses available, we will not hold a drawing for that district. We will just go forward with the evaluation process on those applications. And if the application meets all of the criteria, they would be awarded a provisional dispensary license. If they do not, then we would not award a license to that applicant. If the number of applicants submitted in a district is greater than the number of available licenses, then we will proceed to a drawing for that district. And the drawing will include all of the applicants who applied for that district, subject to any automatic disqualifications. And the main disqualification that we're looking at right now would be if someone did try to submit, for example, 5 applications for the same location, that would disqualify them. Any other disqualifications we would look at when we review the actual application. So that drawing would take place. Every applicant that applied in that district would be listed in drawing order, and that ranked order list would be used to award the provisional dispensary licenses. So, if we had 5 applications and we had 5 licenses for a particular district and we had 100 applications, we would look at the first 5, and if they all meet the qualifications, then those 5 would get a provisional dispensary license for that district. If 2 of them were not qualified, we would move on to the next 2 applications on the list, and if they were qualified, then we would award those to the PDLs. If they weren't, we would continue that process. So again, I guess I just explained this. If we determine that they're not qualified, we will move on to the next license. If an owner is license limited, then the PDLs will be issued in the order in which they were drawn or would have been drawn had a drawing been held. So, for example, let's say a licensee already has 4 dispensary licenses. They're eligible for 1. They submit 5 applications. They get their first one drawn. They would not be eligible to receive the other 4, and we wouldn't even review those applications. They would just be awarded the first one. It wouldn't be a system where a licensee could go in and choose. It would be in order of the drawing. And we've also been asked, can multiple applicants apply for the same parcel? The answer is yes. However, the first one drawn and approved would get the license, and then any future applications that also identify that same spot would no longer be eligible because that location would not be available any longer. We've also added a requirement, and again, we're really trying to ensure that these dispensaries get up and running, and we don't have delays for years on end. So every applicant awarded a provisional dispensary license must provide a monthly written report to the board detailing its progress to become operational until it receives its certificate of operation, or if it received a notice that we were attempting to withdraw that license pursuant to Chapter 119. Licensing and registration renewal update. As I've said a few times, I think our deadline for patients, and we also had an extension for employees as well. So the licensing renewal deadline was moved to July 1st. All of our dispensaries renewed their licenses, so we did not have an issue with any dispensaries that are no longer around because they failed to renew. We had a few associated key employee licenses that were renewed, but we've worked with them, renewed late, but we've worked with them to get them all renewed. So the new licensing period will run until July 1st, 2023. I believe I indicated we made a rule change to change the licensing period. It used to run from, I believe it was December 4th. But we decided it was easier with that change just to keep that July 1st deadline going forward. So for the patients and caregivers as well, House Bill 404 extended their registration deadline. Any patients who go into a dispensary now must have both an unexpired registration and an active recommendation in order to purchase medical marijuana. And as I indicated when I was talking about the numbers, those renewals are still ongoing. And I have a slide up here for questions. I normally don't put that up here because we have questions, but I put it as a reminder. At the last meeting, Ms. Mosca had asked me a finance question, so I wanted to make sure I remembered to get back to her on that. If I recall correctly, she had asked whether we had discussed lowering the patient fee based on the finances of the program. I went back and I talked to our finance guru, and I may have shared a little bit of this with you the last time, but he gave me sort of a more complete picture. But he would like to see a program that's operational for about 5 years before making any type of financial decision. Right now the fund is stable, but we are still repaying the program loan that we received in order to get it up and running, and we are expected to repay that loan before June 30th, 2023. So that combined with the fact that we do have this new RFA coming up, and we don't know if we will need to get additional funds in order to support that RFA yet. And having thought about your question, I think my thought would be, if that were something we would pursue, it might be more amenable to give a 2-year registration period rather than reducing the fee. Because we do see a lot of patients that struggle going through that renewal process for their registration card. So that would reduce, I'm sure Jessica would appreciate this, that would reduce, sort of the support that's needed for patients in doing that renewal. So I think once we get to that program stability part, that would be something that we would definitely discuss and consider. And that's it for me.
All right. Committee members, any additional questions?
I just wonder, as you were going through the RFA process, you mentioned that one of the things that could potentially disqualify an applicant is submitting multiple applications for the same parcel, let's say. Mm-hmm. Will any other qualitative judgments be made before the ranking?
I'm not going to definitively say no, because it's possible we could come across something and add that into the RFA, which hasn't been released yet. But looking at it, we feel like most of those things could be caught on the back end. So for example, if someone already had 5 licenses and they applied, when we were actually doing that application review, we would find that, and that would disqualify them at that point. What we're looking at going into the drawing itself are any things that would give an unfair advantage in the drawing process.
Thank you. I did have one other question. I noticed in the employment numbers, there was an additional dispensary operational since our last meeting, but the number of employees dropped by about 70. Any idea what's causing that?
So my guess would be that those are ownership-related licensing. I didn't look specifically at which numbers have dropped. I doubt that our number of employees actually working at the dispensary themselves have dropped, but I can check and get back to you on that. But we do see changes of ownership, which would result in perhaps consolidating. We might have a situation where there's 10 owners and they sell to another company and there's only 2 owners, and that could drop. So we have had lots of changes of ownership, in maybe the last year probably that have happened.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Ms. Martin-Moore?
All right. Thank you.
Don't get too comfortable. We might have more.
I know. I'm ready. I'm here.
All right. Thank you. Mr. McElvaney, you are up.
All right. Well, thank you, advisory committee members and program stakeholders, for joining us today to discuss our program updates. In terms of commerce licensees, we are now up to 27 cultivators growing medical marijuana, 34 processors manufacturing product, and 3 operating testing labs. One Bond Labs also is set to receive its certificate of operation in the coming days, which will be the 4th operating testing lab and the 1st operating lab in the Columbus area. We also are scheduling final inspections and expect a few additional processors to receive their certificates of operation in the coming weeks. The number of employees at Commerce licensees also continue to increase, including a total of 3,504 active employee badges. This table highlights the total number of active employee badges at each specific Commerce licensee, including Level 1 and Level 2 cultivators, processors, and testing labs. And in this graph, you can see the progression of active employee badges at Commerce licensees over the past year, including a 65% increase in active employee badges since our July 2020 advisory committee meeting. Patient purchases of medical marijuana also continue to significantly increase, including a total of $493 million in total program sales by the end of July. Right now we're seeing around $7.3 million in product sales per week. Notably, the average cost of both plant material and manufactured products continues to remain stable over the past year. Specifically, the average cost of plant material is right around $31 per 1/10 of an ounce. And in this graph, you can see that the average price per unit of a manufactured product continues to remain stable, just under $43 per unit. In terms of key initiatives, the MMCP recently issued updated guidance to licensees regarding requirements for the use of Delta-8 THC in medical marijuana products. These requirements include program notification and compliance with THC content caps, packaging and labeling, record keeping, and testing rules for the production and distribution of products containing Delta-8 THC. The MMCP also proposed rules to update the definitions of THC and THC content within the Ohio Administrative Code to clarify how THC isomers and analogs are treated in these definitions. The department also has completed its review and issued new provisional testing lab licenses to SV Labs in Toledo, Midway Labs in Columbus, and CP Labs in Columbus. The department continues to review the remaining testing lab applications, and qualified labs will be awarded a provisional license on a rolling basis. The program also continues to implement accountability measures to ensure quality testing, including review of testing lab standard operating procedures and evaluation methods, review of potential regulatory updates to increase standardization of product testing, and engagement with Metric, our seed-to-sale tracking system, to implement configurations and other updates to better track licensee testing results. So thank you again for joining. Happy to answer any questions regarding Commerce initiatives.
Committee members, any questions?
Regarding the total sales figures, is it where you thought it would be at this point, or did you have projections before on where it was, and what do you think 2022 was?
Yeah, I think right now at about 7.3 million per week is pretty much along projections. I think over the past couple of years, we would see, I would say over the past 2 years, right around 5.5 million to 6 million. We saw an increase kind of during spring, summer of 2020, but I think, it's right along line as more patients register and get their cards, and the patient participation rate also increases. We're just continue to see an increase in the amount of product that's being purchased each week. So I'd expect that that trend to continue.
Yeah, me as well. And on that note, as things scale and grow, what is your thought or opinion on the cost of product per unit? As things scale and grow, do you see that going down? Only because I do worry about cost for patients. I hear that feedback as a practitioner all the time about it being cost prohibitive. I was just wondering, as it scales and grows, perhaps there may be some efficiencies that are realized and passed on to the consumer. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, we certainly pay very close attention both on the cultivation capacity, the product supply side, and review patient demand to see where that relationship is, because that would have an impact on the price of products. What we've seen over the past year is there is a very stable relationship between product supply and capacity and patient demand. So as patient demand increases, we've brought on new cultivators and capacity. We've also seen, as you mentioned, cultivators get increased efficiencies and economies of scale. So all of those are working in tandem. So I think the relationship is very stable, and what we've seen is the prices are as well. But as we think about the next phases and increasing capacity, I think we would hope or at least expect to see a downward pressure on prices.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Medley. So I know at the testing labs, I feel like for a while we've been kind of stuck at this 3 number. I know I've asked this before. Do you have any data as far as are we seeing any bottlenecking with that? Or I know you mentioned we've got some more licenses, but it seems like we've still been stuck at this 3 on these testing labs and getting that product again, from the cultivators and out to the patients. Is that a concern or?
Yeah, that's a great question, and testing is such a critical component of the program. Right now, we have not, identified any bottlenecks. We've seen, enough capacity, but, we have made an effort through the application process to get new testing labs on board to make sure we do have the capacity. One Bond Labs in Columbus should be operational here pretty soon. That would be very helpful, both from a capacity standpoint and a regional location for licensees. We also have, a few additional provisional licenses that we've awarded through the application process. I think a couple of those we're confident that they should be operational sometime probably mid to late fall. So we do have additional capacity coming on that I think will be helpful as both patient demand and capacity increases.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate the update.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Moving over to the medical board, Ms. Dorsey.
Good morning, advisory members and stakeholders. Thanks for joining us today. So the State Medical Board is tasked with the 2 main areas of the program with relating to physicians who can get the CTR endorsement, as well as the additional qualifying conditions that are added to the program. So each year, as I had mentioned before, there is an open period where we can receive petitions. Those can come from anyone, and that last year occurred between November 1st and December 31st. And we did receive 30 petitions, and on June 9th, the board did vote to add Huntington's disease, spasticity, and terminal illness, and that is terminal illness with a 6-month life expectancy. Ohio now has 25 qualifying conditions in the medical marijuana program. The next steps will include a new petition period opening for this year that will occur in November. The portal is closed until November, and no new requests for petitions will be accepted until that date. There's a reminder that during that petition period, the petition must include all of the outlined areas listed in the administrative code in order to receive board vote and review, and that we can review petitions for previously reviewed conditions which have been rejected as long as there is new scientific evidence. Moving on to the second portion of the medical marijuana, or the medical board's oversight of medical marijuana, would be our Ctr Physicians. We have currently 654 physicians who are active. That is of August 4th, and there are 293 locations on the map. The physicians, we broke that down by physician type. Only MDs and DOs are allowed to recommend. Podiatrists are not allowed to recommend. And medical doctors are 77% of our CTR holders. The CTR Physician Survey, that was sent out
recently, and that was to satisfy the administrative code and revised code section that requires each physician who has a CTR to report back the efficacy of medical marijuana for the qualifying conditions in which they're treating patients. We created a CTR annual report that was just approved yesterday by our board. That has been updated to our website as well as to the MMCP website for everyone to review. We received survey responses between April 30th and June 15th. We did receive 544 individual physician responses. We did have over 600 responses, but we did notice that there were some duplicates. So we decided to take a further review and make sure that we were reporting out individual information from those physicians. So we broke down the number of active CTRs by year. As you can see, in 2018, when physicians were first allowed to obtain the CTR, we have the lowest number, and that we had gone up in 2019 and remained steady in 2020 to 2021. We also went ahead and broke down that number by month over the last year, just to show a track of where we're moving. So we saw some increase, and then it dropped just a little bit. Our current numbers. Our current numbers are pretty stable in comparison. I know there was some question before about there being a drop in physicians, but it appears that those are stable. That could have been due to the pandemic and the medical board allowing physicians to have extra time to renew. So back to the physician annual report. So we included questions regarding the physician's opinion of the effectiveness of medical marijuana to treat the condition to satisfy the requirement. But we also included additional conditions or additional questions related to some feedback that we had received from this committee, from some of the advisory councils that we work with, from some of the communication we've received via our medical marijuana inbox, just some frequently asked questions that we wanted to be able to report out. So we included that information in the survey as well. So in the survey, we identified the number of physicians who are actively recommending, and as you can see, we have quite a few physicians who are actively recommending, but we do have a few listed who are not. So approximately 70% are making recommendations and 30% are not. We did follow up that question with why aren't the physicians who have the CTR recommending. And you can see some of the trends up there, and the responses that were either chose not to respond or were NA were all piled in together as a no response. So you can see a majority listed a prohibited by employer, as well as some other information that they need in order to move forward, just looking for more program information. So we're hoping to utilize this information as far as getting more program information by creating more resources on our website and working with the associations to provide CTR physicians with the information they need. So on the annual report, we broke that down by each one of the conditions that were approved and the observations of the effectiveness of those. And so we noticed that the highest satisfaction rates appeared to be for cancer, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, and PTSD. So COVID-19 update. So last year the board suspended regulation that required in-person visits. And the board had voted in June that we would resume the enforcement in September. However, yesterday at the board meeting, the board discussed the possibility of extending this date for the sake of patient safety, and decided that they would extend that until December 31st, 2021. So in-person patient requirements will resume on January 1st, 2022. We have created FAQs that should answer a lot of questions that anybody would have regarding rules for resuming that in-person visit. Those are on our website. Those have been put on the MMCP website. We have circulated them out through newsletters, and we will continue to provide updates. That's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you. Committee members.
Thank you, Matt. Quick question on the Ctr Physicians annual report. The column not applicable.
Yeah.
What does that refer to?
For which one specifically?
I'm sorry, the reported observations of the effectiveness of medical marijuana communication.
Oh, okay. So the not applicable could mean that those are not conditions for which that physician who responded had not treated for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that being the case, I think I would suggest that potentially the best way to look at which are showing the best results would be to take the satisfied as a percentage of the total, the last three columns, satisfied, dissatisfied, and neutral. I'm the first one under 8. If you look at it that way, it looks like about 83% showed that there was, they were satisfied with the result that they were getting. I give it a good look at whether it's effective or not effective. But I really appreciate you taking a look at that. It's been a big thing for me to really see if this is working and what it's working for. So thank you.
Sure. And what we really looked at too was the dissatisfied column. There was very little reported back of people being dissatisfied. So that was an important thing to look at as well.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion, Mr. Stanek, is, if we were to recalibrate, as you mentioned, there could be some statistical biases, and I suppose perhaps for future surveys we could tease out the non-applicable a little bit differently to capture data better. But I would actually suggest to look at like dissatisfied column, and you'll see like 0.18, 0.74%. I mean, that's pretty telling. By way of background, I'm sure a lot of you know I'm on the medical board, and I think it's appropriate to some extent for me to make a comment about something that weighs on my mind, particularly when it comes to qualifying conditions. Because at the board, we get these petitions, and oftentimes they come with stories and data and information, and we review those. And they're compelling, and we understand, we sympathize with citizens and with people that put those forward. There's a mantra in the Silicon Valley: move fast and break things, right? That's how you innovate, that's how you build these huge companies. But as a practicing physician, there's a mantra the other way that's beat into our head the first day of medical school, when you graduate, and all the time. First, do no harm, right? And it's hard to reconcile all of that when we look at these qualifying conditions. And it's not that we don't understand and appreciate what people are going through. It's that we poll experts that claim to be experts in the field, and obviously we vet them and we talk to them. And sometimes the risks do outweigh the benefits, and the harms, in terms of the data we have, outweigh the benefits. And I'm saying this because I want everyone to know that the medical board takes all of those applications seriously. We really do look at them, and we sympathize with those situations, and basically we're doing our best. Thank you.
And I just wanted to piggyback off that from what Dr. Soin said. Even the petitions that don't meet the full criteria, those petitions aren't ignored. They're still sent to our committee for review. So the Medical Marijuana Committee does review every one of the petitions that comes in. The ones that are moved along for full board review are the ones that meet all the requirements and that our committee approves. But every single one of those is reviewed.
Question on that. Are you seeing an overwhelmingly, correlation as far as the ones that aren't moving forward? Is there a common ground as far as what's preventing them from moving forward? Is it research and science-based?
Yeah, because I do review those, so perhaps I could talk about that. That is true. So a lot of it would be data and research. Probably when we vote as a committee, the biggest thing we take into consideration, in addition to the application, is actually the opinion of the experts that we engage. And we ask them to tell us the risks and benefits and what they know from the data. So for example, last time we had someone submit an application for a disease called complex regional pain syndrome, and the entire application form was probably 3 sentences long. Like, there's literally nothing in there. I would like it for this condition, I suffer from this condition, I think this could help me, basically was what the entire application said. And so, we hire experts and have them sort of look at it, and we look at that. Now, having said that, I would suppose, to your question, if that application was super robust and full of information, that would certainly enhance our ability to deliberate on that application, because otherwise we're only listening to the expert, right? So I think if people want to submit an application for something, do your best to articulate your position the best you can. That would really help us.
And I would say also take advantage of that public comment period as well, because that public comment period is there to receive feedback about some of those conditions that have petitions moving through, so that way patients can speak out, or physicians even. There's been times where I noticed this year we got additional scientific evidence from a physician during the open comment period.
Dr. Soren, do you expect any conditions to be brought forward to the medical board?
It's hard to say because some of us are on that particular committee, just by the way things work operationally. Email addresses are public. So we get emails from people, or oh, my kid has this, and I love marijuana, etc. But a lot of times those don't actually materialize into petitions. But one thing I will say that we try to do first is, if a petition comes in, we try to see if we could fit it into one that's already approved. For example, complex regional pain syndrome, that application that was 3 sentences long, we replied to that person and said, look, our experts say that it's not exactly approved for this particular condition, but if you're certified as a chronic pain patient as a result of your disease, you fit the criteria. What I'm trying to say is we're trying to do our best to try to get people what they need, and that's part of it.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Committee members, any additional questions?
My question's on the reasons for not recommending medical marijuana and the number that sticks out to me is prohibited by employer. What is being done to address this situation? Has any follow-up been done as to why that seems to be the number one reason why?
So at the medical board, we are working specifically with physicians. And so the physicians that are seeking that CTR endorsement, by making it, we've been doing what we can to make it easy for them to be able to become a part of the program. As far as additional communications out to hospital systems, that's just not necessarily our role. We want to really focus on our licensees. And so us continuing to have good communications about program rules and allowing physicians to have an easy way to drop their CTR if they choose to, or to have communications with them. That's really our focus of trying to educate them and focus on them.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll
you're fine.
for just a moment. With the coming up of our 73 additional dispensaries going to be coming through the process, is there any concern as to the current number of physicians recommending and those patients that could be coming on board as soon as access is easier?
So we have quite a few physicians who are in the program. Not all of the physicians are recommending. So that's why we did the survey, to kind of reach out and figure out what's going on. Why aren't they recommending? What are some other reasons there? And so that's really kind of why we did the survey and why we made the survey have more questions this year. So
We think there's quite a few providers out there. We have not received a ton of feedback about patients not being able to find a provider. We've gotten some feedback that we've been working with the pharmacy board on trying to help patients, get in contact with the provider that they have, but we haven't received a lot that says they're not finding physicians. But we do track that. We have a specialized medical marijuana inbox where we can receive communication from anyone, and we track that. And that's actually too where we pulled some of the ideas for questions. Like a lot of patients asked about costs, so we wanted to include that in the survey. Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Committee members, any additional questions for anyone? Mr. Stanley.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, as we're coming up on the sunsetting of this committee, I just wanted to thank all the members of the administration of the three boards that oversee this program and the predecessors of them. They have always been very very professional, very thorough, and been very open. And it's been a pleasure to work with all of them, as well as the fellow members of the committee here. It's been a real pleasure, and I wish them the best as the program continues to move forward.
Perfect. Well, I think you kind of segued into our next piece in our area here. Pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 3796.021, this committee will be sunsetting, as you had just mentioned, and this will be our last meeting. So on behalf of myself and the Board of Pharmacy, the Board of Commerce, and the Medical Board, I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating and taking the time and providing all of your insight and your thoughts and the questions that you guys are providing. So we really, truly appreciate it. It's really, truly been invaluable to every single one of these committees. So as I call each of your names, I do ask for you to stand. So Mr. Kowalski, Ms. Seidel, Mr. Stannon, Dr. Sloan.
Thank you.
I figured it would be best. Ms. Moore. Thank you. Ms. Wilson. And Mr. Paceman. Thank you guys. We appreciate everything.
And we appreciate you too.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Again, much appreciated. I do want to call out that if there are any questions just about travel reimbursement, I know that we haven't been in person for over a year now. So if there are any questions, Paula will be in contact with you just to connect you with the right people to ensure that reimbursement and your travels are. So at this time, I would like to end